In this foundational video, I'm talking about how you can start to eat healthy if this is absolutely new to you. If you're in a world where you really haven't approached healthy eating at all, this is the foundation where you begin with. So let's just break down various ways of eating, and we've all been there at some point in time. And of course, if this is too basic for you, then feel free to move on. And if you've already done all of this, then you want to go to the next stages. This is where you begin. If you've been eating what is a standard American diet, if you're somewhere in the US, or if you're just living in India and eating a grain heavy diet, so this is where you should begin. First of all, if your meals are predominantly grain based, which means that maybe your breakfast is cereal or it's dosa, idli without any protein, very little vegetables, and it's just grain heavy. Even the lunch is grain heavy, such as white rice and rasam, or just pasta without any protein. So you'll just have to feel that this is the way that you set yourself up for metabolic disorder, is with this constant sugar spike, with eating these sugars from grain which are not balanced with proteins, fiber and fat. You start to allow your body to constantly release insulin, and eventually it gets to a state of insulin resistance. The insulin doesn't know how to take the nutrient from the food and deliver it into your cell, and therefore after a while, when insulin goes up, then eventually blood sugar starts to rise. If you're in that category where your meals are predominantly grain based, I'd encourage you to start by just adding a little bit of vegetables to every meal, and definitely some protein. And maybe you want to just consider adding a little bit more fat. For example, if in India and you're eating a meal that is idli, this dosa with a tomato chutney, which doesn't really have any protein, you might want to consider the balanced version of it, which is coconut chutney, vegetable sambar and idli. So this will just give you, so if you're eating pure grains, just starting to add vegetables which give you the fiber, starting to add some proteins, and making sure that all your meals have some vegetables for the fiber and some protein. So ensuring no matter whether you're vegan, vegetarian, and of course the chances of you eating a grain heavy meal if you're vegan or vegetarian is much higher, and just trying to start off on that level. On another note, if you find yourself having constant cravings and feeling as if you need mini meals right through the day, this is something which I see predominantly even when somebody is eating protein. There are some reasons for this. One is that you're eating too small meals, and of course there's a lot of popularity about the 2-hourly diet, but from an Ayurvedic perspective or from a functional medicine perspective, eating mini meals is not, as it's key, it doesn't allow your digestive system to get a break, and this puts a lot of strain, setting you up to develop conditions such as SIBO, which is small intestine bacterial overgrowth, because you're not really giving that break. So if you find that you have breakfast and then you feel hunger at the pit of your stomach or just cravings, there's either you're not eating enough or you're having this fiery state of digestion which needs to be calmed down with more cooling foods and reducing fiery foods. But most often it's because there isn't enough protein. If you have a challenge with cravings and you find yourself reaching for coffees filled with sugars or little snacks like pastries, cookies, I would say begin your day with a plant protein shake, no matter what you're eating. And I emphasize plant protein because the whey protein can be quite toxic. Most whey protein out there is not really clean sources, and this will set you up to give your liver and kidney some load. So looking for a very clean pea protein, not soy protein, but any pea protein which is digestible and palatable. Starting breakfast with it can set you up for an entire day of reduced cravings, and therefore eventually you will get to a state where you yourself start to choose more of that vegetable for the fiber and protein at all the meals, and you go past needing more than 3 meals. The next part is if you're craving crunchy, salty snacks. Sad part is that most of these come from processed foods which use poor quality fats, trans fats that oxidize, and this is what actually leads to elevated cholesterol. It prevents the gallbladder from having a free flow of bile, and the bile, rather than being free flowing and liquid, becomes thick like sludge, and eventually develops gallstones. And if the bile doesn't flow and you can't digest your fats, then what happens is that eventually cholesterol is not used to form sex hormones or cortisol, and it leads to high LDL and triglycerides. So if at all you have that craving for that salty, crunchy snack, and sometimes we all do, try to keep it to once a week, or rather once in 2 weeks if that's more comfortable. Make sure that you do freshly fried at home in fresh coconut oil, which can tolerate this higher temperature to deep fry. Do, rather than pure sugars like potato chips, do plantain chips, which is a little more buffering to the gut, and just make sure that it's random. And a lot of times when I've seen people who've had a lot of gallstones, they've also had the habit of having fried foods 3 to 4 times a week, which is simply toxic and inflammatory and puts a heavy burden on the liver. When it comes to cheese, we've got all extremes of it, and the processed cheese is very slimy and sticky, and it can melt. Of course, it's delicious, and it is in a way addictive. And in Ayurveda, there's a term that encompasses all channels of the body, be it digestion, blood, urine. All these channels come together in one terminology called shrotas. And for any problem to arise, that shrotas can get blocked, or they can get congested, which can lead to poor detoxification, poor nutrient uptake, and processed cheese with its slimy, sticky is considered channel clogging. Of course, on the other end of the spectrum, the fresh cheese, like freshly homemade cottage cheese at lunch, is absolutely nutrient rich if you can tolerate dairy. But somewhere in the middle, if you do enjoy cheese, make sure that you don't have challenges with sinus congestion, water retention, because these just will not allow for the intake of cheese. But just focus more on high quality cheese, which is freshly made in a farm, and making sure that you consume it along with plenty of fiber. For example, rather than melting cheese into an enchilada or a burrito, which is white flour, instead having a little bit of fresh cheese on a whole grain toast with lots of high fiber vegetables, then you won't really find that you are impacted by that negative effect of the cheese. Finally, of course, is sugar, and sugars can very quickly add up. So we'll just find that having a little cookie in the morning and then having green, heavy white rice or white flour products, and then these add up, then it becomes a pastry, it becomes ice cream. So these things can very quickly add up. So it is very hard to break that loop of sugar because it messes with the brain neurotransmitters, and it's almost it's as addictive as heroin, and that there are these opiate receptors in our brain which start to seek out that sugar. So it's really impossible for us to break that loop. If you find that you're completely addicted to sugar and you sit down, you can open a box of sweets, finish it in one afternoon, and then maybe you're even oscillating between deprivation diet and high sugar diet, which is a classic loop of addiction where you try to deprive and then eventually spiral into this addictive loop of sugar. In which case, I'd say just begin by at least trying to make homemade desserts with jaggery and coconut sugar, so that you're slowly trying to remove that addictive nature of white sugar. Yes, all sugar is sugar, they're still going to mess with your blood sugar, but at least rather than going cold turkey, which can be extremely difficult, you start by swapping out and making some healthier options at home. Cookies, a lot of them are available on the market with the label healthy, and white flour free. But if you go into the label, you'll really see that sugars are listed in so many ways. Maybe they're even listed as low fat, which then makes even the sugar from a jaggery that much more impactful. So again, I would say start by trying something at home. For example, making cookies with a lot of ghee, whole grain flour, jaggery, nuts and seeds, and then these, make sure that you just enjoy one after lunch when your response to that sugar is much better. Ice cream. So in dairy, there are so many aspects of it. Ayurveda is a huge fan of dairy, and clean A2 milk is considered extremely nourishing and building to ojas if you have access to something like that. And ojas is our immunity, our vitality. If you do have access to clean milk, make sure that you have your milk with spices and ghee, and always warm so it's not channel clogging. Ghee, of course, is wonderful. Yogurt made at home is great. But when it comes to dairy, what you need to watch out for are ice cream, because the cold constricts the blood vessels in the gut and it weakens digestion. So if at all you want to have that ice cream, have it very rarely when you're out after lunch, just a little bit to give you that little enjoyment. But always try to stay with warm desserts rather than cold dessert. So ice cream, keep it out. Keep out the processed cheese, which are again channel clogging. And keep out the store-bought yogurt, which have other additives apart from the dairy, which become slimy and sticky and are also channel clogging. And other allergenic foods are considered eggs, shellfish, and peanuts. So let's just break that down very quickly. Eggs, if they're farm bred, free range eggs, they're absolutely fine, but they are difficult to digest. So rather than having them at breakfast, have it at lunch with vegetables and some whole grain, and then you'll find the eggs do work for you. Don't combine them with other proteins. If it's peanuts, it's very rare to get clean organic peanuts. Most peanut sources are mold related. So if you have issues with yeast overgrowth or frequent fungal infections, you want to keep the peanut out completely. Peanut butter from the store has a lot of additives and it's very channel clogging, so it's best kept out. However, a nut butter, sometimes with whole grain bread, such as the almond butter, cashew butter with a lot of vegetables, whole grain bread and very little nut butter can work for you. And shellfish are quite problematic for a lot of people. If you have challenges with migraines, excess appetite, rashes, feeling hot flashes, then they won't work for you. So again, there's a lot of ways to begin, but start wherever you're comfortable. But this is a foundational cleanup. So if any of these resonated with you, start wherever you can. Maybe start by just adding some protein. Once the cravings go down, start to reduce the fried foods. Just begin by eating more vegetables. So make it work for you in a way that is sustainable.